Tranquility du Jour, December 11th, 2018. Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 436th edition of Tranquility du Jour. As I mentioned in last week's episode, we'll be offering podcasts each week in December, because December can be a hard month for many people, so I wanted to pass along as much inspiration as I can. Also, we have quite a few interviews in the can, which means that we have a lot that I have recorded and are waiting for you, so I want to get them out. And then also, I just thought it would be fun to connect a bit more this month. So, thank you so much for being here. Tranquility du Jour is a podcast featuring artists, activists, and authors from around the globe sharing education and inspiration. Today we're chatting with Linda Graham about resilience. So you're going to learn about neuroplasticity, the 5 different intelligences, how to strengthen your resilience, and how to care for your brain. Now, if you're new to Tranquility du Jour, I have a link in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/436. And it gives all sorts of information about Tranquility du Jour, meaning what it is that we are doing here, from podcasts to e-courses to books. And soon you're going to hear about a brand new project I'm working on, but I'm not quite ready to reveal it yet, so stay tuned. Also, if you are interested in getting a little dose of love into your inbox every couple of weeks, there's a link in the show notes to access and sign up for my Love Notes, which also gives you access to Tranquil Treasures, which is a resource, a library filled with various MP3s, PDFs, and videos on things ranging from yoga to mindfulness to style and creativity. Now, for those of you who are local, I've got quite a few things coming up really over the next month. So first off is December 31st. I'm back to Tranquil Space to offer a workshop, a New Year's mini retreat, which is something I've done for probably the past decade. It's a 3-hour retreat. Would love to have you. And then the next day, I'm hosting a 2.5-hour retreat in my therapy space office, and we'll be doing mindfulness, reflection, intention setting for the new year, and creating an inspiration board. Now, on the January 26th, I've got an online, my TDJ Lives, which I do seasonally, a free 1-hour video event. There's a link in the show notes, again at kimberlywilson.com/436, where you can sign up. Also, I'm hosting a writing salon, so a 2.5-hour writing salon here in DC on January 12th. And then a 4-week Tranquility Salon, where we will dive into topics ranging from mindfulness, self-care, creativity, and dreams. And there are 2 spots left for that, and the application and all the information can be found again over on my website and in the show notes. Also, if you're interested in escaping the chill of DC or the rest of Northern America and beyond, February 16th through the 23rd, I'm hosting my annual retreat in Costa Rica. And this may be my last one for a while. So if you're debating, would love to have you join us. And the early bird special for this, which saves you quite a bit, ends December 15th. And then last but not least, my final retreat that's scheduled for 2019 is in Tuscany. And that's July 13th through 20th. And there's 8 spots left for that. So if you're interested, grab one of those, or let me know if you have any questions. And of course, I can always be found at kimberly@kimberlywilson.com. And I love hearing from you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So I'm fresh back from a girlfriend's weekend in New York City, and look for a blog post about this later this week, where I'll share kind of where do we go? What are my favorite spots? Because over on my New Here page at kimberlywilson.com, I have links to my favorite spots in DC. Because a lot of times people come to DC and they're like, what should I see besides the Capitol? Which is amazing, but what else? And then I also have links to my ideas for Paris, and I'm always adding to that. So I thought, well, why don't I create one for New York? So look for a blog post and then look for more links and whatnot that will be added to the New Here page, featuring ideas on finding tranquility and enjoying the city. Again, beyond the Empire State Building, which all that stuff is magical, but there's many, many resources out there for that. So we hit many, many vegan spots. We even saw To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, which was an absolute treat. We saw the movie Can You Ever Forgive Me? Highly recommend. I think it has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. And we took a ballet class, which it was my girlfriend's very first ballet class. It was so much fun at the Joffrey Ballet. And then we also took a yoga class. And then we picked up lots of fun gifts that she took home for herself and for her family. So it was just a really fun adventure. It's just so lovely to get away. And really, when you think about it, it was only 48 hours because we met up Friday afternoon and she headed back Sunday afternoon. So it's just amazing what a couple days outside of the day-to-day can do for the soul and spirit. Oh, and of course we went down to Rockefeller Center and saw the beautiful, huge tree. And I took a photo, and you can find that on Instagram, instagram.com/Tranquility du Jour. Now, without further ado, Linda Graham. So she's an experienced psychotherapist who integrates modern neuroscience, mindfulness practices, and relational psychology in her international trainings on resilience and well-being. She's the author of Resilience, which we're talking about today, and also Bouncing Back, the winner of a 2013 Books for a Better Life Award. You can find her online at lindagraham-mft.net. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your new book, Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster.
That book was really a joy to write because it came out of so much teaching that I've been doing. So I've been learning from students and participants what really works, what really grabs hold. And so it flowed fairly easily. My hope is that it's very practical, that it's useful, that it's easy for people to follow and get some benefit from.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to write about and work with resilience.
Well, I've been a licensed psychotherapist now for 25 years. So when I work with my clients, so much the focus is people feeling derailed from their capacities to cope, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed out, and sometimes needing just to come back to center, sometimes needing to learn new skills so that they can relate to people more effectively or make decisions better or regulate their nervous system better. So the focus of my therapeutic work has really always been resilience and helping people not only cope with challenges and crises and adversity better, but to learn that they can, to see themselves and claim themselves as someone who's resilient. So that's been the focus of my work for a very, very long time. And in fact, it's been a joy to learn from my clients what works, what helps them actually recover that inner secure base, that equilibrium. And then I can use that in my teachings further.
Resilience is a bit of a buzzword, I feel like these days, a good buzzword, but a buzzword. And so how do you define it and why is it so important?
Well, in the human condition, we are called upon all the time to cope with things that are new, sometimes things that are unsettling, sometimes things that are disturbing or even disastrous. That's part of being a human being. No one is immune to that. And even though we do everything we can to develop our capacities to be resilient and strong and courageous, we're tested all the time. So resilience is simply a foundational life practice that we need to have, need to develop, need to strengthen. So I define it, or it's traditionally defined as capacities to cope, to bounce back from adversity, to deal with difficulty and disappointment and even a disaster, so that we come back to our equilibrium, back to our own center, and we can deal with whatever is happening. Now, that definition is being sophisticated all the time by research in behavioral sciences as well as in neuroscience. And so I have focused my own working with resilience on the capacity of response flexibility, to know what's happening to know how we're reacting to what's happening, and to be able to shift gears, shift our perspective, shift our behaviors when needed to be more effective. So shortcut, my friend and colleague Frankie Perez says, how you respond to the issue is the issue. And so that's where I'm focusing, helping people be more skillful in their responses to any level of disruption to their resilience, really from barely a wobble. You misplace your car keys and it takes you 2 minutes to find them before you go to work in the morning, but you find them and then you're back on center, to the more serious struggles and sorrows that really break our heart, like losing a job or losing a relationship or losing your home, losing your health. I mean, there are some serious things we have to deal with in this life. To then the trauma of just too much of that happens all at once, and your aging parent has a stroke and your house gets flooded, too many things all at once. But the idea is that resilience gives us the capacities to meet any of those levels of disruption and to have more and more faith and trust that we can. So as, Louisa May Alcott says, I am no longer afraid of storms, for I'm learning how to sail my ship. That's the idea of resilience.
Such great information with regard to resilience. And I'm curious how you would most encourage, because this book is packed with wonderful practices. How do you encourage our listeners? Like, how do we get started with strengthening our resilience?
I always encourage people to start small practices repeated many times, because that's how the brain learns from experience, little and often. So doing something that feels fairly accessible, and it's true, there are many, many exercises in the book, but putting your hand on your heart to calm down your nervous system, doing a gratitude practice at the end of the day to shift your perspective on things, starting something small, but repeating. And as people find what works for them, an important part of strengthening our resilience is noticing when something shifts, noticing when you're getting better or stronger at something. So we try these practices over and over and over, and that builds the neural circuitry in the brain to create a new habit, a new pattern of response. So I want the practices to be self-reinforcing. The truth is most people get started trying to develop their resilience when something has gone wrong. Otherwise, we're sailing through our life and we don't pay any attention. But when something starts to go wrong and we're experiencing stress or we're experiencing distress or some kind of disaster we're having to cope with, then we start looking for what the tools are. Very often, one of the best things we can do is find resources with other people, because we regulate each other's nervous systems. If we're around someone who feels safe and calm, we're going to feel safe and calm just being in their presence. So that's another thing that I suggest people start to do right away. And then I would add, besides hand on the heart, which is touch, using visualization. If you can remember being with a friend where you feel safe, if you can evoke a sense of being with a compassionate friend, then that also pretty immediately helps people calm down, come back to center, come back to their range of resilience, and then they can decide what to do next. But the little and often is what's key.
I love that you mentioned the hand over the heart exercise, because I actually had that on my list to ask you about, because I took a workshop with Amy Weintraub.
Mm-hmm.
You may know who she is.
Oh, I do, yes.
Yeah, and she had mentioned the power of that and how it helps to calm the autonomic nervous system. Or was it the...
Right.
The autonomic. I can't remember, one of the nervous systems. And so I love sharing that with people. And, but I'd never really seen much data out there on it. And then whenever I saw it mentioned in your book, I was like, kindred spirit. So can you speak a little bit to that? Because I find myself intuitively doing it. And I think probably a lot of our listeners may also.
Right. I think automatically the hand can go to the heart when we're startled. But now there is so much data about why that works. So whenever there's a moment of startle or upset or distress, the hand goes to the heart center. Actually, it can work also to put your hand on your cheek, to give yourself a little hug, but there are brain cells, there are neurons in the heart. And so there's a direct, immediate communication with the brain. So you put your hand on your own heart center to feel the warm touch of your hand and begin to breathe more deeply, slowly, gently into the heart center, where you're activating the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the branch of the nervous system that allows us to calm down and rest. So by breathing more deeply, you're activating that resting in your body. By breathing in a sense of ease or goodness or safety or kindness, you're actually restoring the coherent heart rate variability of your heart, which allows you to respond more flexibly. And then what I've added in the hand on heart exercise is remembering a moment, just one moment, when you feel safe and loved and cherished with another human being, not the whole relationship, but just one moment. And when you can evoke that sense of feeling safe and loved and cherished, that activates the release of oxytocin, which is the brain's hormone of safety and trust. It's the brain's direct and immediate antidote to the stress hormone cortisol. So as soon as you remember a moment of feeling safe and evoke that feeling in your body, blood pressure goes down, the heart rate goes down, you can come back into a sense of calm and ease again. So this technique is powerful enough to bring someone out of a panic attack in less than a minute. So it is one of the first things that I teach people. And besides teaching it in that moment, then I suggest practice this 5 times a day for a week. Just create that pattern in your brain of putting your hand to your heart and breathing deeply and remembering a moment of feeling safe. Because if you practice that over and over and over again, the next time you hear a car backfiring or you get a letter from the IRS, your brain will automatically find that pathway and automatically do this pattern and help you calm down. So that's a beautiful example of how people can get started.
I love that. And I love hearing kind of more about the data behind it because, yeah, I do. I mean, I do find it to be a fairly intuitive act. People will be talking, just like in a group, and I'll notice a hand over the heart. And I think it's like we're drawn to it. And then it's so lovely to be like, oh, there's science that shows that this is actually therapeutic.
Right. So in this realm, if I may, another thing that may be automatic, we may do it unconsciously and people don't know that it's a skill for recovering their resilience, but it's to take a sigh. It's just to breathe deeply out. And we may do that, but we may not feel like we have permission to do that. But a deep sigh will also help restore the balance in the autonomic nervous system. So it's a really good thing to do if we're feeling just slightly overwhelmed, to give ourselves permission. And that resets the nervous system and we can keep going. So there's many of these tools that science is now informing us why they work, even though they may have been common sense to human beings for centuries.
Can you share a few more of your favorites, Linda, that you find like, oh, my clients love this, or they find it to be incredibly helpful? So sighing, always a great thing. And then, of course, hand over heart. And what else comes up that you're like, oh, these are good ones?
Okay, so I'm going to up the ante a little bit here and offer a tool that's a little bit more sophisticated, but the fact is the science is so solid. And that is whenever we're experiencing some distress, hands can still go to the heart. But then to offer ourselves some mindful self-compassion for what we're experiencing. Now, this comes from Kristen Neff at University of Texas, Austin, and Chris Germer at Harvard. They've developed a mindful self-compassion protocol. But if you take a moment, something is happening, and you just take a moment. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I accept this moment exactly as it is. May I accept myself exactly as I am in this moment. And then may I give myself all the compassion and courageous action that I need. When we interrupt the automaticity of our survival responses, we interrupt the automaticity of our negativity bias, of going into reactivity and contraction. When we interrupt that and offer something positive, like kindness or compassion, that shifts the functioning of the brain. It shifts the functioning out of contraction, negativity, reactivity, into a more open perspective. There's space to breathe. We move into the larger picture, into more optimism, and the direct, measurable cause and effect outcome is resilience. So anytime we use a positive emotion, and this may be counterintuitive to people when they're having a rough time and they're just focusing on getting through the day, but anytime we cultivate a positive emotion And that could be kindness to ourselves or other people, compassion, gratitude, generosity, delight. Anytime we experience that positive emotion, we're shifting the functioning of the brain. And if you repeat that many times a day, you can shift out of the negativity that we often get into when we're coping with something that's difficult into a mindset where we're more likely to be able to see options and choose different behaviors. So that mindful self-compassion break is very powerful because very often we go into self-criticism or judgment if we feel we're reacting badly or reacting poorly or don't know what to do. So it sort of pulls us out of that self-criticism and self-judgment. May I accept myself exactly as I am? I'm doing the best I can. And then we're more likely to be able to see a solution to the problem.
I love that. It's I did a training with both of them last year around this time, and one of the things that really stuck out to me that she said, and I share this a lot with my own clients, is treat yourself as you would a child with the flu.
Exactly.
Have you heard that before?
Right.
Isn't that like so
yes.
gentle?
Yes, right. Along these lines, another tool that I often teach pretty automatically now is to change every should to a could, because we say should to ourselves a lot, and should puts the mind into a kind of contraction. It sets us up for performance or an expectation, and it sets us up for the possibility of failure if we don't do what we think we should. But if we change the should to a could, well, I could do that. I could try doing that. It opens up a sense of possibility, and we're much more likely to actually follow through on the behavior. So that's one of the things that I teach my clients early on as well, to train themselves to catch the should and change it to a could, or change an I have to I get to. Again, we're moving out of a sense of burden and into a sense of blessing. And we are much more resilient when we are in that good space.
Beautiful. Those are great examples because I think we are very familiar with the word should. And oh my gosh, I have to, it's a very important mindset shift. So thank you for that. And, as you're talking about this, it also makes me think, of course, of Rick Hanson's work, around neuroplasticity and what have you. And I think he was my first exposure to all of this. So can you talk a little bit about how we can change our brains to ultimately change our lives for the better, really like using neuroscience?
One of the tools that I've learned from Rick and that I use in my own book is taking in the good. And it's what we've been talking about. Anytime that there is a moment of ease or pleasure or satisfaction, one, to notice it, just to stop and pause and notice it. And then two, to take some time with it to savor it, to actually linger with the experience. And then to absorb it, to really feel it. So when we did the hand on the heart and you evoke a sense of feeling safe with someone, you allow yourself to feel that in the body. And then you, by feeling it in the body for 10 to 20 to 30 seconds, you actually are creating a new neural pathway, a resource in your brain. And then Rick suggests repeat that experience 5 more times during the day. 30 seconds of practice, 3 minutes total, you create a neural pathway in your brain. So the reason that works is that any experience, this is the neuroplasticity part, any experience at all, whether it's positive or negative, will cause neurons in the brain to fire. If you repeat the experience, you'll repeat the neural firing. If you repeat the experience many times, you're strengthening the circuitry of the neurons that will remember how to do that firing. So you're actually creating a new neural pathway. That's why a lot of, we learn to be resilient through experiences that actually create those pathways in the brain, and we can remember that we can be resilient. So the neuroplasticity is what allows us to create new patterns, but to change and rewire the old patterns. And that's one of the most important things about being resilient. Very often we have learned patterns either from our evolutionary lineage or from our experiences growing up in our families, in our schools, and we've learned patterns of coping that may not be the most effective now, and we want to be able to rewire those patterns, because they will operate unconsciously if we don't do something differently. And so again, the way to do that is to be able to juxtapose something positive with something negative. And when the positive is as strong, and when it immediately contradicts or disconfirms the negative, that juxtaposition causes the neurons holding those memories together to fall apart and rewire again. A fraction of a second later, it's called memory deconsolidation, reconsolidation. So we can use that deliberately. Neuroscientists can now see that happening in their scanners, but we can use that deliberately when something negative is sort of taking over to bring to mind something positive that is strong, it's realistic, it's doable, but it also disconfirms that negative, and then just watch the negative begin to fade away. So yes, we learn how to harness our neuroplasticity to change the brain's patterns in a more wholesome direction. And in fact, Richie Davidson, who runs the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds in University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's done so much of the research that shows the impact of mindfulness and all of these practices on the brain, says that neuroplasticity is actually the rule rather than the exception. The brain is actually changing and growing more than it is not. So when we learn how to harness that and send it in the direction we want it to, we can actually create changes in our brain that create changes in our behavior. So yeah, it's very, very real. We're just learning how to do it better.
Can you give an example of, maybe a common scenario that you see with clients of wanting to work with kind of this creating a new neural pathway? I mean, I'm thinking of like holidays coming up, right? And, all the challenges that come up around family. So, I was wondering if that might be a good example, or just, in everyday life.
Mm-hmm. So here's also an example that I teach a lot because it's effective, and it involves using movement to rewire the neural pathways, because anytime we move our body or change our posture, we're changing experience of our emotions. So we can use that to work with difficult or negative emotions. Now, the emotion that is most difficult for most people and most derailing of our resilience is shame. It's the feeling that gets triggered when we feel that we're less than, we're inadequate, we're a failure, we're unlovable. That whole territory of our resilience, because we tend to collapse and kind of withdraw and hide out. So I work with my clients, because most clients kind of know what we're talking about, and shame can easily get activated around the holidays, around families, and we want to be able to work with that differently. Many, 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 many tools in resilience to work with shame. But one of the ways we can work with it is something I learned from Natalie Rogers, who's an expressive arts therapist, but also happens to be Carl Rogers' daughter. And it's using movement to rewire these emotions. So I have my clients get in the posture in their body when they're feeling some shame. And that usually means they're hunkered over, the chest collapsed, the head goes down, they may put their hands in front of their eyes. Fairly universal body expressions of the emotion of shame. And then without thinking, they're not talking themselves through this, but they just let their body move and find a posture that feels opposite to the shame. Now, I'm not directing this, they're doing it themselves, but very often the body straightens up and they stand up taller and their arms go over their head and they get an energy feeling in their body of feeling empowered and feeling confident. And so we go back and forth a few times, feeling the shame experience, but then moving into the posture where they feel more empowered and more confident. And they practice that before they go visit their family, they go in for a job interview, or before they go into a court hearing. You practice coming into that sense of resilience and confidence and empowerment before you go into the difficult situation. And it works very, very powerfully for people to feel stronger and more courageous when they go into those hard situations. So that's certainly something that I'm teaching people anytime, but also around this time of year.
I like that. Thank you. That's really helpful. It almost makes me think too a little bit about the power pose.
Right. And the difference is when Amy Cuddy developed the power pose and did her research on it, she begins by having people come into that stronger posture. I have found that it's very helpful if you begin with a negative posture and move into the positive posture, because then you're actually rewiring the entire response. You're rewiring. It's not just new conditioning, creating a new experience. You're doing the reconditioning and rewiring the old experience. So I think when people take the time to do it, it's actually more powerful.
I like that. That's helpful. And, one of the pieces you talk about too is like with the fight, flight, freeze, that fold, that whole kind of response that we can have, to maybe speaking in public or, walking into the family dinner or, whatever it is. And so how do you encourage your clients, particularly through the use of resilience, to become more comfortable and to alter their response to something that feels dangerous, even though it might not necessarily be life-threatening?
Right. So again, I would start with something small, and then they apply it to more and more challenging or sophisticated situations. But in our brain, anytime we're experiencing something new or different, it doesn't have to be dangerous. It's just new. The brain will send off a signal anxiety. Uh-oh, I've never seen this before. I'm not sure I should be doing this. And we stop, we hesitate. And so if we can recognize that very natural response of the brain to something new as a signal, it doesn't necessarily have to mean danger or anxiety. It's just a signal to pay attention. And so when we can, I need to act here. I need to try the thing that seems hard. Eleanor Roosevelt said, do one thing every day that scares you. I need to try the thing that seems hard and experience some success in moving, in acting. It doesn't necessarily mean I'll do the right thing in that moment, but I'm in action. I'm moving, which I'm activating my nervous system. And that gets us through that signal anxiety. We still have to use our skills or learn new skills to be resilient and choose the right behaviors, but it gets us moving out of that kind of inertia or paralysis. So when people can start practicing one scary thing a day, it doesn't have to be necessarily going to the family right off the bat, but something that brings up that hesitancy, and just practice doing it anyway and learning, I can respond to that cue by taking action. And you begin to see yourself as resilient. Then you can apply it to harder and harder cues, harder and harder situations. But it's little and often, again.
It's almost like a little bit of exposure therapy, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, it is. And so yes, in exposure therapy, we're exposing ourselves to something that's scary, but in incremental steps. I think when we know what's happening in the brain and that we're choosing to work with our brain in a very proactive, empowering way, I think that also gives us more sense of success or more sense of effect at being able to create those changes when we know we're deliberately doing it and how it's working in our brain.
Now, in this book, you outline the 5 different intelligences: somatic, emotional, relationship with self, relational with others, and reflective. Can you just say a little bit about each of these for us?
Okay. So I present those intelligences in that order because that's how we develop them, in that order. So we develop our body-based skills to be resilient first. We don't even have to have words yet to do that. So tools of breath and touch and movement and visualization, we've been talking about those already because they're the fastest way we have to regulate our nervous system. And then skills of emotional intelligence, which is both being able to manage difficult emotions, and the mindful self-compassion protocol is very helpful for that, but also being able to cultivate the positive emotions that actually make us more resilient. So it's working both sides of our emotional intelligence. And then the relational intelligence within is pretty much coming to our own inner secure base of self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-appreciation, so that we're not derailed by shame. We're not derailed by the inner critic. We have confidence in our own capacities. And then the relational skills with others depending on our experiences, sometimes people can be wary of other people or relying on other people too much and not having their own inner secure base. So the relational intelligence with others is simply skills where we can reach out to people to be a refuge, to be a source of comfort and protection, but also reaching out to people to be resources and being able to give good counsel and support, and trusting ourselves, trusting other people to do that. And then there are many skills in the book as well. When relationships aren't going so well, how do we make them healthy and resonant again? And then the reflective intelligence is our mindfulness practice that allows us to know what we're experiencing while we're experiencing it, noticing what's happening, but also noticing our reactions to what's happening and giving us some mental bandwidth to back out of the experience and the reaction, have some space where we can begin to see what our options are and discern what options would be wise and to make a choice. So the mindfulness helps us be aware of patterns we already have and how we might want to rewire them in a more wholesome direction. It's really the integration of all of those intelligences that allows us to be resilient. So we're using them all at once. I just broke them down to make them easier to access and to practice. But eventually, we're all working together. It's as one whole human being.
Gotcha. Beautiful. I love the way you've broken them out into the various chapters. And, your last chapter that I think is just so helpful as we think about kind of application to everyday life is caring for and nourishing your amazing brain. And you've got these 7 lifestyle choices: exercise and movement, sleep and rest, nutrition, learning something new, laughter and play, hanging out with healthy brains, and digital vacations. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose these 7 very important practices?
Well, the research is already strongly supporting the first 6. So there's a lot of research now about the impact of exercise on the brain. And it's actually one of the healthiest things you can do for your brain, because exercise makes your brain grow new neurons, and then we can use those neurons however we need to. Sleep is so essential to restore the capacities of the brain to do anything, to do any learning. And likewise, nutrition affects how the brain functions. So there's a lot of research in those fields already. Learning something new is, as we understand more about how the brain degenerates as we get older, and we want to keep our brain working well and delay or even reverse the impact of Alzheimer's and other cognitive functioning impairments. Learning something new that requires the brain to do complex activity. And that's why they suggest learning to speak a foreign language, learning to play a musical instrument, learning to play chess, where different parts of the brain have to work together to do that task, will keep the brain functioning in a sharper way. Play and laughter really restores the neurochemical balance in the brain. That may be counterintuitive to people, but to have a laugh, even in the midst of tragedy, actually helps recover the neurochemistry in our brain that we need to be resilient. So all of these, hanging out with healthy brains, because we are social beings, we have social brains, we actually function better when we have a sense of connection and community. But the last one of taking a digital vacation, that's where the research is new, because our digital technology is new and the research is just beginning to catch up to the impact of the time we spend on our devices, the impact of that on the brain and on the functioning of the brain. So I tried not to go into too much of a rant about that in the book. The research is becoming more and more evident, and it's becoming stronger and stronger. But we really do need to give our brains a break from the rapid stimulation that comes from our devices, because we're not evolutionarily hardwired for that. And we don't want to compromise our capacities for concentration, for focus, for empathy, and being able to tune into someone else's feelings and be able to express our own feelings. We don't want to lose our capacities for solitude and dealing with boredom, for our own capacities to do self-reflection and introspection. So I put it in there because I'm wanting to preserve how the brain can function in a healthy way and how our relationships can function in a healthy way. So the vacation idea is simply giving your brain a break and letting it recover its capacities that it normally has and live your life in a way that really provides a lot of function and nourishment.
What's great is there is a lot of data, right, that's starting to come out on how important that is. Taking a digital sabbatical, all these sorts of things are like a, detox, digital detox, even if it's just a few hours on Sunday, whatever it is, it's, such an important piece. And I think the part that you raised of getting comfortable with boredom, actually, and then, when you're standing in the elevator, do you really have to look at your phone, or could you just stand and breathe and feel your feet on the floor? So it's a good reminder. And Linda, before I ask you my last question, is there anything else that you would like to speak to that I didn't cover about, from your amazing book, Resilience?
Throughout the book, I'm emphasizing that we have a choice. We can make choices to harness our neuroplasticity, to have new experiences and create new wiring. As I go around teaching about resilience more and more, and especially in these times, I realize we have not just a choice, but we have a responsibility to learn how to be responsive to what's happening in our lives and in our world today. So I'm hoping that when people experience the benefit of making these choices and feeling more resilient, feeling more capable of coping in their lives, they'll also take seriously that responsibility to learn how to do that. We really do need to be wise and skillful in how we're responding to the events of our world.
Yes, I love that. Respond versus react.
Right.
Now, Linda, my last question for you. The name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So I'm curious for you, as a writer, as a therapist, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
I do emphasize, my word for tranquility is equanimity and being able to respond to whatever is happening from a place of calmness and yet engagement. And so I probably do 5 practices in a row to recover my equanimity. There's not just one, but I will put my hand on my heart. I'll do the mindful self-compassion just to bring myself into the present, my own experience. I'll remember a moment of feeling safe and loved and cherished, and then I'll notice that my mind is moving back out. Okay, what are my choices here? Just remembering that I have choices is part of my resilience. And so then I can come back out. So that's generally what I do. Probably the other thing I would add to that, and I'm adding it because when I interviewed other experts on resilience for my website interviews, almost everyone talked about nature and being able to be in nature. And it's true. The practices now of forest bathing or sense and savor walk, when we can spend time in nature, it has a profound effect on our nervous system. And we know that we're part of something much larger and vaster than we are personally. And it actually really contributes to a sense of being held by something larger. So that I would also pass on to people, just spending time in nature.
I love that. That's such a great reminder. I took a forest bathing workshop this week at the Smithsonian down here in Washington, D.C., and it was amazing. We were just kind of walking through a garden that is in the heart of the city, but how important it is, right, to have that green space no matter where you live. So thank you for mentioning that. It's so, so powerful.
To be in the green space and to be mindful of being in the green space, to actually let that experience resource you and know that it is resourcing you. That's part of resilience.
Right, versus walking through it on your phone,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Linda, so much for writing this amazing book and sharing all your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's been a joy to talk with you. Very much appreciate the opportunity.
Savvy Sources. Again, you can find Linda at lindagraham-mft.net and her book, Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster. There's a link to that in the show notes to learn more. Also, you can find her on Facebook, Bouncing Back Linda Graham, and then on Twitter at Linda Graham MFT. Also, mentioned in the podcast, there is a link to Bouncing Back, Rewiring Your Brain for Maximum Resilience and Well-Being, which was her book from 2013. Both of these are fabulous. And resilience is such a buzzword these days, and yet one that it really deserves all the credit it gets. Being a buzzword of sorts, meaning like there's so much kind of fire behind the smoke in a good way. There's so much data around it. And I love too how she incorporated so many things that I've been studying over the past few years of the neuroplasticity, the rewiring of our brain, and, things along those lines. So there's really juicy stuff as we also look at the blending of resilience and mindfulness. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Now, finally, of course, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. There are links to all of these in the show notes, KimberlyWilson.com/436. There's also a link to my clothing line, Tranquility, my 5 books, various e-courses, which I'm going to be revamping all of them in 2019. So if you have any interest in these, you may want to scoop them up now. And then also the app. You can download Tranquility du Jour, have it on your iPhone or Android, and then kind of always be tuning in. There are 13 years of podcasts available. And so I can't believe I've been doing this now for 13 years. And there's just lots of really goodness of so many interviews, so many wonderful people that I've been able to connect with through this show. And so if you want the app, it's $1.99. You can also learn more about my passion for animals, which is the impetus of Pigs and Pugs Project. And then also, if you have a moment to pen a review on iTunes or share this podcast via social media, I would be so grateful. And then also, if you have a moment to pen a review of any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads, would be very, very grateful. My hope is that this show, the books, the e-courses, that this work helps other people find tranquility in their everyday lives. So wishing you a delightful week ahead. Thank you so much for tuning in, for being with me today, and happy holidays. Namaste.